We have a good half an hour. The rules are that please say who you are. I think you don't need to stand up with this small audience. I prefer you say something than ask a question, but you can ask a question if you want to. You're on the record, so please we'll start here. And then Sheila, yes.
Hi, Raffaella Bellanca, consultant in sustainable energy. I'm thinking about the two ways in which efficiency is brought about. So one is the structural change. You pass from producing cars to selling insurances. And the question here is someone somewhere else will still have to produce cars. So does it make sense to look at these data at the country level when we are interested in the complete world? The second part is, okay, so the structural change and then the technical efficiency. But isn't that another maybe more subtle way in which efficiency is brought about, which is thinking in terms of a more integrated approach where possibly the waste from one type of industry is the resource for another type of industry, and linking together processes and thinking about new ways of producing, for example, combined heat and power, or designing products so that they can be easily recycled. Is it possible to produce policy to push in this sense? And have you done it?
That's an interesting question. We'll take two or three and then come back. Take you next, Sheila, and then over there.
Thank you. Sheila Page, ODI. I have three concerns from this. The first is the first charts that were shown in the UNIDO presentation don't actually show a declining use of energy. They show all except the lowest income countries reaching some sort of plateau. There are varying plateaus, and what evidence do we actually have that this is not just that the 90s were the trend and the 2000s were the blip rather than the other way around, which is what you seem to be assuming? I really was more concerned at the fact that you're only showing about 20 years worth of data, because for energy this is effectively useless. But I do think that we need to ask why in the 2000s energy use does not seem to have fallen, except in the countries where, in a sense, it's easiest to do it, the countries with the largest structural changes and the most potential for change. Which brings me to the point which Andrew stressed, which is the importance of structural change in industry as a driver. In a decade where we are seeing, particularly in the developed countries, too low investment and too low growth for any structural change to be happening, should we be more pessimistic about this type of change? If the structural changes are just happening in the sense of production moving from one country to another, as the last question implied, we're not really seeing structural change at the global level, so are we going to be seeing this energy saving? And finally, one of the solutions which almost all of you presented was, of course, there should be more investment. I mean, when in doubt, put in more funds. At the expense of what? And this is, in a sense, Simon's question. What is the justification for considering this the paramount target at the moment for investment?
All right, Ludo, I hope you're stacking these up. We'll take this gentleman here, and then we'll give you a chance to reply.
Yeah, my name is Akin Akiboye. I'm from the University of Vang in the Northern Isles. And my question is this: what is the view of the panel on industrial disaster through energy deficiency in the developing world? Because I did not hear anything about industrial disaster, which actually occurs in most of the developing world. And I think this is very important for development.
Good, thank you. Ludo, we'll start with you. And I've got three questions that have come in on the iPad, but I'll save those for the second round.
I will ask you to please clarify that as I answer, because I'm not sure I understood it. But anyway, I'll start. In global trends, I think we present the figures for global trends. I think the analysis that we try to do is global, and indeed, we do the structurals although the figures that I was presenting, the reduction of 25%, which in intensity is at the global level, not our country. We do have, unfortunately, to analyze this country by country because that's where our data comes. But above all, we do it country by country because that's where policies are taking place. We do not have any way to do policy at the global level, at least not yet. We are proposing a number of approaches at the global level, benchmarking, etc. Indeed, many of these take place at the level of industry, not even at the level of countries. And I think it's much more effective to work at the level of industry for some of these benchmarks. But unfortunately, it is the way we have to work. We have to work with countries. So those are our constituents. In an integrated approach, that's the second point you made. Indeed, I think I didn't have time to go into all details. But there are two chapters where we specifically talk about energy management systems and energy systems. Because it is clear that the most effective way to increase efficiency is by addressing the problem systemically. At the same time, it's the most expensive one. So there's always a trade-off between let's say, go systemic and reap the very large benefits in efficiency, but you have to invest more, and the money is not always available. And there's an opportunity cost, as you're pointing out to that investment, which we did not look into, but it's a very valid question. But I'll get back to that. Indeed, also on the heat and power example that you mentioned, we do analyze one case, and so far the heat and power technology is extremely costly and expensive, and it doesn't seem to be justified as it stands at the moment in terms of returns. So I think if one wants to go that direction, one would need to get some support or subsidies from the government because it on private grounds alone, it doesn't seem to be justified at the moment. But that is one of the most extreme examples. There are other systemic approaches, and that can be profitable. I wasn't sure what your questions were because we're talking about energy intensity, not so much about energy consumption. Okay.
Energy intensity charts that you showed by region, all except one have the shape
downwards, and
and that was effectively what they were.
Okay.
And you said, actually, in your presentation, there was a fall in the 90s
Yes,
and not so much in the 2000s.
yes. Indeed. And I mentioned that I was a bit concerned with unfortunately, I even use the word unfortunate. Well, indeed, there has been also an improvement in energy intensity in the 2000s, but it certainly has not been as fast as in the previous period. Now, if you look at the 1980 to 2000, we don't have those figures, but I know them by. The problem we always have here is the methodological point first. The larger the sample you have, the smaller the time period you have, the cover. You always have those trade-offs. So if we wanted to include 130 countries, which we have there, which is unique, nobody has 130 countries, we had to shorten the period, and we only could start in 1990. We couldn't go beyond, because then we ended up with 30 or 40 countries, which would have been developed. So, or mostly developing, except China, India, etc., the big ones, then you end up with. So that was a trade-off. So we started in 1990, so we could cover a wider coverage. That's a methodological point. We did. I was also puzzled by why it is big. It is petering off towards the 2000s, towards the end. I'm not sure about that. The point that if we had I think if it had a longer period, we would have also the 80s energy intensity. But still, the way it arises, why are we having it now? And to be honest, I'm not too clear about it. If we think in terms of it may have to do with a number of developing countries entering. The first thing I would have thought is, let's put it this way, that I would have thought is that we have a number of developing countries entering industries that are energy intensive. And that, but when we look into the figures, and the figures that he has doesn't suggest that is not the case, because in developing countries are actually improving their energy intensity, and due to technological factors, not to structural factors. So we were very puzzled about that one. That developed countries are the ones that are exiting energy intensive industries, and the developing countries are not acquiring them, What they seem to be doing is at the same time they seem to be improving their technologies. So even though they may be acquiring these industries, they're being much more efficient at generating output in those industries. So I must say that we are still looking for answers for that one. We
will come back to that. I think because if there isn't a gain, then we might as well all go home. So let's hang on to that. We'll come back and finish what you want to say about other points.
Yeah, the opportunity cost of investment. That's a very tricky one. We can see the nature of the rates of return. The only indicator we have here is the rates of return of the project here. 40% is quite acceptable, it's quite reasonable. Now, this was a sample of 200 projects, 190 projects, etc., which pick up selectively. It is suggestive that the investment in this activity is profitable, privately profitable. Okay, but we need to do a bit more research. That's why we tried econometric research to see how that is faring. But we have to do a bit more research at the micro level and address. The problem is that not many, because there are very few loans and very few data on energy efficiency projects. We cannot have a very precise understanding of what's going on. But that 40% is quite suggestive.
Okay, and the point over here. Do you want to?
Yeah, the industrial disaster, energy disaster. I don't know how to connect to this one, but
May I remind you of the incident that happened in India, Opa incident, which is part of the industrial development, and at the same time, the people during that period. So there must be a sort of mechanism whereby the international community should be able to help.
The only point I can make here is that. And Nicola also made it, is that energy efficient firms tend to be all-rounders. That means that they tend to be good at innovation, they tend to be good at useful material, and I suspect they tend to be good at safety too. And those, and I suspect, we haven't studied that because that's not what we were trying to say here, but I suspect that those firms that are energy efficient would be probably better at safety too, and they would probably, in principle, reduce the chances of having energy disasters.
Okay. I want to come back to this question of, is this pie in the sky, really? Because, it was fine and then it's plateaued and you're dreaming. That's the charge against you. And I wonder whether anybody else can help us on that question. 40% rate of return doesn't sound so bad. On this particular point, are you on this point? Please.
My name is Tina David. Is it just that can you use this? Hello, Tina David. Is it just that there are more gadgets around now that we're using more energy on? It may be more intense in the sense of compared with the past, but look at all the equipment we've got around here at the moment that's using electricity. Would that have been the case however far back you started the exercise?
Well, this is, a lot of this econometrics holds the technology and the product constant. So it's like, how much energy do you need to produce a bag of cement is the question. Yeah. Just the gentleman there, and then Nicola, I want to come to you because you wrote a blog about, limits to efficiency, didn't you? So we'll take you first.
Thanks. My name is Daniel Buira from the Carbon Trust, and I'm coming to the question of, is it pie in the sky? And I'd also like to tell you something rather than ask a question. So I guess what I'd like to do is start from the observation, there's a lack of political will, and I think Nicola's last slide describes some of the actual concrete challenges that you face to get a firm to make a decision, to make an investment. And so what I want to describe is a program called the Industrial Energy Efficiency Accelerator that Carbon Trust is undertaking, working with 14 different industrial sectors in the UK. So this is very bottom up, but it's trying to give evidence as to how you can make these savings. And I guess my only question will be at the end, as into who do I talk to see who wants to discuss how we could do this in other countries. But essentially what this program does is it works with specific industrial sectors in collaboration with leading firms and with trade bodies to identify what are the potential energy savings. An example is the bakery sector. And we then get engineering consultants to review the industrial process from scratch and to do a technology review. We've discovered, for example, that in bakery you can use plastic baking tins instead of metal baking tins because they have lower thermal mass. And then we work with the collaboration and the different partners to say, okay, who wants to pilot this innovation? And so the interesting thing here is that these energy savings go beyond best practice. We then find a partner that wants to run the pilot. We see who does it for the least funding so that the program can get the best return for the program. Once the pilot is run and we demonstrate that technology works, we disseminate it across the industry to get sort of new best practice. We've managed to achieve energy savings up to 29% in different sectors. So it's not pie in the sky. And the real trick here is to get the firms to invest their own money. And then that whole opportunity cost question. You know, this isn't government money trying to solve 20 million problems at once. It's a little bit of government incentive to coordinate a program to get firms to do what's economically sensible for themselves.
That's really. Is there a database on your website?
The program is quite young. It has 14 sectors, and they're sort of underway. So there isn't a database as such, but you can sort of
Carbon Trust
ask
website for
questions.
more information. Very
That's
good.
right.
Just not to spend the whole time on this question, but a couple of other hands were up. Was your hand up, Andrew?
Yes. Andrew Scott from ODI. Just in this question of is it all pie in the sky, it just took me back to a presentation I heard earlier this morning by Uwe de Boer, who was describing some work done by KPMG, which basically concluded that if you include all the environmental costs of energy production and consumption, many industrial sectors wouldn't be profitable. In particular, he described that the food sector, the food processing sector, as being potentially marginally profitable if you did that. So in a sense, one question would be if the full costs of energy were included in the profitability analysis, would that be a key driver to improving industrial energy efficiency? The second point, I think, is coming back to this whole systems idea, is in fact that we shouldn't be looking to industrial energy efficiency as being the only place to find energy efficiencies. There's domestic energy efficiency, there's efficiency in construction and buildings and transport and all the rest of it, all of which together need to be come to the if you like, the final answer in terms of energy efficiency. And then final comment is whether or not at the policy making level we should perhaps putting more focus on the energy consumption side of things rather than the energy in production side of things.
Very good. And there was one more, and then I want to move on, but we'll come back to you on in a second on something else maybe.
Hi, I'm Colin Rosnow, visiting intern here from Boston University. Basically, I was wondering, kind of on the subject of solutions, I've looked into a lot of research on, modernizing our electricity grid and how infrastructure for that, especially the two-way grid, in which you cannot just send energy straight out from the factories into a wall and never to get used, but actually have a system in place where you can cycle it back into other areas of the city, other areas of the economy that might be needing energy at that point. And I'm wondering, I didn't really hear anything about it during this presentation. Maybe it's not specific like your expertise, but it is kind of an issue, I wonder, in the next decade, of being able to control, your appliances via your smartphone, hooking everything into the internet so you can see, like, on a consumer level, how much energy you're using in your household. And I think the information, especially being able to see that, is going to be a key driver in changing people's actions and how they use energy. So I'm wondering what sort of, I know in the States they've conducted some pilot programs on using kind of a smart grid system, but I'm wondering what, if anyone has an opinion on kind of the future of that and what role it has to play in energy development.
I do want to make sure that we have some boundaries around the discussion, which is about energy efficiency in manufacturing and not about energy. Just 1 second.
Okay.
But Nicola, I want to just give you a chance to say some of the things that were in your blog. But a point I started out with right at the beginning, which is that we might well be on the verge of a complete industrial revolution associated with pricing carbon and trying to reduce the use of fossil fuels, which kind of also plays to your point, in which within factories we're trying to shift from gas to electricity, for example, or from coal to gas to electricity in a series of steps. And it just strikes me that there might be huge changes underway in the way in which energy is used in industry, holding country and industry constant, that will completely swamp anything that we might do at the margin in terms of energy efficiency. And I just wonder whether you'd like to comment on that, as well as the general question of whether this is pie in the sky.
Yes, I found interesting your question. The solution is a solution just to shift from the production of cars or from one country to another, for example. I think that a positive message coming from the report is that in developing countries, at least in developing countries which are investigating the report, energy, the technical effect of energy intensity is decreasing over time. So energy efficiency is improving in developing countries. I think that, of course, I agree with you, structural change from one country, so export, the production of dirty products from one country to another is a solution, is not a solution. But I think that we should seriously take into consideration the positive message deriving from these results. So developing countries are decreasing energy intensity, energy efficiency is improving in developing countries. The blog with that Simon referred, is energy efficiency the panacea for the climate change problem? Of course not, because every environmental scientist knows that there are limits to energy efficiency. And for this reason, we find that energy efficiency is so improving in developing countries and structural change is improving in income countries, because there are limits to energy efficiency. Of course, in income countries where the energy intensity are already very low, the main components, the main driver of energy intensity improvements, of course, is represented by structural change, because it's very difficult and very costly to obtain energy efficiency improvements. The point made also, but of course we should consider that we should investigate energy efficiency together a wide range of options. There is an interesting report, the World Development Report 2010, explaining what options should be put in place in order to obtain a timely reduction of emissions. You will find energy efficiency, you will find renewable energy, you will find a carbon capture storage. Philip mentioned before some of these options. But it's important the timing. It's important to act now, because the time in which we will reduce emissions will be very important for the consequences in developing countries. Just a flash comment on Andrew. Okay, what happens if we include the environmental costs in our profits, in our profitability analysis? I think that very important message, I agree with you with this point, but a very important message arriving from this analysis is that there are already option for firms in developing countries to obtain zero cost improvement in energy efficiency. If today, for example, we think about, for example, the habit to turn off the light that we were discussing before with Simon and Andrew, you can understand what, in many cases, how can be easy to obtain energy efficiency improvements in firms. Of course, for much more complex, probably Ludovico can say more about this, for much more complex energy efficiency investments, the situation is much more complicated because we should also consider, for example, the financing environment, the fact that you need very patient investments for environment, because, of course, benefits are enjoyed only in the medium in the long term.
Thanks. I've got a number of questions from the ether, one or two of which are slightly kind of broadening the range of discussion again. I want to try and focus on how do we manage increased efficiency in the industrial sector. But Imran Shariar, who is an ODI fellow in the Ministry of Finance in Sierra Leone, wants to know about where are the highly skilled energy experts who are going to deliver this, and is there a scarce number of people? Mike Bess picks up some of Andrew's point about the wider energy issue. And I suppose it's worth saying that quite a lot of this other energy is manufacturing, but at a local, domestic or village level. Absolutely. And so it's not out of order completely to discuss that issue. And then Leila Reiner, who's an economist in DEC, looking at energy efficiency, asked a number of things, but including, why should I bother with this? These are not her words, these are my words. Why should I bother with this rather than, for example, commercial or residential sectors? So that's back to your 40% IRR, and is this really where the good entry point is? Let's try and focus on policy issues for the remaining 5-7 minutes. I know, Dirk, you had a question, and I wanted to bring you in if you're still on message, so to speak. Dirk. But please, everybody now be really brief because we're running short of time.
Thanks, Simon. I'll turn it into a policy question on policy. Behind energy efficiency is, of course, technological change and the rate of technological change, and particularly energy-saving technological change. And there's also a price effect. And I think there was a dichotomy in the panel that the gentleman from the World Economic Council said everything's to do with energy efficiency is prices, or at least there was a strong price element in it. And subsidies need to be removed. So there's a question of policy issue there about subsidies. And subsidies are about $300 billion for fossil fuels. It is about $1 trillion energy consumption, as we learned from UNIDO. So we're really spending about 1.3 trillion on energy. But I think over the long term, it's technological change. So of course, price effects are important now. But in the long run, it is going to be technological change that is driving energy efficiency. But then the question is basically, do we need to think about energy policy or industrial policy? Do we need to think about innovation, or do we need to think about particular types of innovation? And maybe the data we can't distinguish between the two because they're correlated. Can we then maybe say what are the factors behind that, whether there are any differences? And that may be a question for Andrew. Is it different to be thinking about, in terms of political economy terms, to be thinking about energy-saving technological change compared to any types of technological change? I mean, are the factors different? And UNIDO may also have something to say on that because they're very good about thinking about what types of industrial policy works where, when, and how.
What's your answer to that question in 10 words?
Well, I mean, one of the questions is, of course, what lies behind good industrial policy, I think. And there it's very, very much about thinking about good state-business relations, thinking about capacity of the state, capacity of the business sector to coordinate and think about what are the good policies. So that would be my types of my answer. And that I think it doesn't really matter whether we need to think about an energy policy or an industrial policy.
We have two more, but please really quick. But you two. Yes, sir.
Yeah, my name is Ernest Kudike, and I'm an events conference producer with Pinnacle. Yeah, I want to speak with the Dr. Alcott regarding Africa or developing countries. What UNIDO is doing as regards the technological and knowledge transfer in that particular sector, industrial. To ensure industrial energy efficiency, especially at the micro level, because as far as I know, most times when people try to make examples about countries that have been doing so well, they focus mainly on South Africa and maybe in Kenya. What about other African countries and all these things? You know, how can individuals help to ensure that we achieve this? Because we're sitting here and talking about policies. What actions have been taken to ensure that these policies are going to be achieved, because one of the things that are important is action, is acting. And one of the things that one of the person that asked the question talked about the experts. I know that in one of the reports which I've read, they talked about trying to train experts to disseminate this information to different regions and all this. Yeah, what mechanism is being put in place by UNIDO to ensure that this is achieved?
Okay, thanks. Last word to you. Really quick.
Okay, I'm but sorry. Because we really tried to get people from World Energy Council for a long time, and very often you do exclude us from your meeting. I'm from.
Who is us? Sorry.
From.
Who is us?
People from Democratic Republic of Congo,
right.
And every time you try to exclude us. So now my question to you is about what you said here. You do organize workshop in South Africa, and you said about energy poverty and access is crucial in Africa. This is a myth. First, I don't know why do you organize workshop in South Africa. South Africa is not a major energy producer, or South Africa has got the potential to be a big energy producer. You turned only to hide the issue of Democratic Republic of Congo, which can electrify the whole Africa, sell electricity to Italy, Portugal, and Spain, and Jordan and Israel. So why do you always exclude Democratic Republic of Congo?
Thank you. I'm going to stop you there. Maybe you can sell electricity to us as well. That would be really good. We have literally 1 minute. You get one sentence each. I think we've established, I mean, for the sake of argument, we've established this is not pie in the sky. There is scope for energy efficiency. There are rates of return. There are innovations happening at sector level. We can get to a different part of the Kuznets curve. We've talked a little bit about policy. What's the one message? But you've also shown that people who are good at energy efficiency are good at lots of things. So why is this something we should prioritise? And what's the first thing we should do on Monday morning? One sentence each going down the panel.
To obtain a 2 degrees increase of temperature by 2050, energy efficiency is one of the main options to pursue. And together with the environmental benefits, it's shown by our study that it's profitable for firms in developing countries and can boost development, growth, and reduce poverty.
Very good. Very succinct. Andrew.
I would just say, as a touchstone, think how difficult it is to remove energy subsidies. The political process is the barrier, and many of these other things are going to be equally difficult.
Thank you.
I think energy efficiency, one of the main points is a change in consumer behavior, which we need to keep in mind. And also the fact that in developing countries today, the focus is on building infrastructure. And as the UNIDO report has pointed out, that internal rates of return are quite low and payback periods are long, where the investment size is more than $100,000. So the question is one of matching priorities at the national level and also at the consumer level and also sectorally, in order that energy efficiency gains can be maximized.
Thanks. Ludo, we give you the very last word.
Yeah, think of energy efficiency as a way, not as a way to solve all the problems of emissions or to solve the problems of profitability. It is a small step towards achieving some modest results, but are achievable, are not very expensive to reach, and allow us to achieve a number of externalities in terms of other dimensions that otherwise would not have been achieved.
Very good. I think you've distilled a 200 and something page report, 250 page report into some really powerful messages. I think we've had a very interesting discussion with some really strong substantive challenges. I'd like to thank everybody for their contributions, including those overseas, but please join me in thanking the panel.